On the morning Harold Benson stopped tying his shoes, his body made a decision his mind wasn't ready to hear. At 74, he wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid that whatever came next had already begun, without his permission. He sat on the edge of his bed, shoes planted neatly on the carpet like obedient dogs waiting to be leashed. Brown leather, scuffed at the toes. Good shoes. He bought them 6 years ago, back when bending over didn't require planning. Harold leaned forward. The room tilted. Not dramatically. Not enough to scream or fall. Just enough for his stomach to tighten and his brain to issue a quiet warning, the kind that didn't ask for attention but demanded it anyway. He straightened up, exhaled, and stared at the wall. "Well," he muttered, "that's new." The wall didn't respond. It had never been much of a conversationalist. Harold waited a moment, then leaned forward again, slower this time. His fingers reached for the laces, but halfway down his balance shifted. A strange pressure filled his chest, not pain, not fear, just resistance. Like pushing against a door that didn't want to open. He sat back up again, annoyed now. For 60 years, his body had followed instructions without complaint. Lift this. Carry that. Climb ladders. Crawl through crawl spaces. Hold your breath. Tighten the bolt. Finish the job. Now it hesitated. Harold stared at his hands. Big hands. Scarred hands. Hands that had wired half the houses in town and fixed things nobody else wanted to touch. They were steady. They looked the same as they always had. So, what was the problem? He stood up instead, braced one foot against the chair, and tied the laces that way. Awkward, but effective. "There," he said out loud, as if his body needed proof that he was still in charge. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast, not because he'd burned it that morning, but because he always burned it. Harold believed toast should have character, and character required darkness. He poured coffee into a chipped mug that read World's Okayest Dad, a gift from his daughter Melissa years ago. Back when they still exchanged gifts. Back when okayest had felt like a joke instead of a verdict. He took a sip. The coffee tasted wrong. Too bitter. Or maybe too weak. He couldn't tell anymore. Taste had been unreliable lately, but Harold blamed the coffee brand, the water, the machine, the mug, anything except himself. He sat at the small kitchen table, listening to the refrigerator hum. The sound had grown louder over the years. Or maybe everything else had grown quieter. That thought unsettled him, so he pushed it away. At exactly 7:30 a.m., Harold grabbed his jacket and keys. Routine mattered. Routine kept things from drifting. The walk to the mailbox was short, less than 50 steps, but by the time he reached the end of the driveway, his breath felt heavier than it should have. He stopped, pretending to inspect a crack in the pavement. "You're fine," he whispered. The words felt necessary, like an oath. The mail was junk and one envelope from the electric company reminding him of a service credit he'd earned. Harold snorted. "Imagine that," he said. "Even now, I'm useful." On the way back, his knee twinged. A sharp, precise pain that came and went like it had somewhere else to be. Harold adjusted his stride without thinking. His body did that now, made quiet changes without consulting him. That bothered him more than the pain itself. At 10 o'clock, Harold sat in the waiting room of Dr. Evan Mitchell's clinic, flipping through a magazine from 2 years ago. He didn't like doctors. Not because they were unkind. Dr. Mitchell was decent enough, but because doctors asked questions Harold didn't want to answer. "How are you feeling?" That one in particular. The truth was complicated. Complication wasted time. Harold preferred simple answers. Fine was efficient. "Mr. Benson?" the nurse called. Harold stood, steadied himself, and followed her down the hallway. Dr. Mitchell didn't rush. That was his most irritating quality. "You're early," the doctor said, smiling. "I don't like waiting," Harold replied. "I remember." Vitals were taken. Blood pressure slightly elevated. Pulse slower than average. Weight down 3 pounds. "Trying a new diet?" Dr. Mitchell asked casually. "Trying not to eat garbage," Harold said. "Since when?" Harold shrugged. "Since my stomach started arguing with me." Dr. Mitchell nodded, typing something Harold couldn't see. "How's your balance?" the doctor asked. Harold stiffened. "Fine. Any dizziness?"
No.
"Falls?"
No. A pause.
"Near falls?" Dr. Mitchell pressed gently. Harold exhaled. "I didn't fall." "But I didn't fall," Harold repeated, louder this time. Dr. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, studying Harold not with concern, but with curiosity. "You know," he said, "bodies don't usually stop doing things for no reason." Harold bristled. "They do when they get old." "That's the popular theory," the doctor replied. "It's not always the accurate one." They discussed tests. Blood work. A scan. "Nothing urgent," Dr. Mitchell said, "but not optional either." "Your body's been compensating," the doctor explained. "Little adjustments. You might not notice them consciously." Harold didn't like that word.
Compensating.
It sounded like something was missing. That afternoon, Harold tried to fix the loose hinge on the garage door, a job he'd done 100 times. The screwdriver slipped from his hand. It clattered to the concrete floor, the sound sharp and accusing. Harold stared at it. He picked it up, tightened his grip, and tried again. This time, the screw went in crooked. He corrected it, then corrected it again. "Get it together," he muttered. The hinge held eventually, but the victory felt hollow. Sweat dotted his forehead, and his arms felt heavier than they should have after such a small task. He sat on an overturned bucket, catching his breath. For the first time in a long while, a thought formed that he didn't immediately reject. What if this isn't temporary? The idea lodged itself deep, unwelcome and persistent. Harold stood too quickly. The room spun, and this time he didn't pretend it was nothing. He grabbed the workbench, knuckles white, heart pounding like it had something urgent to say. After a few seconds, the spinning stopped. Harold laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Well," he said aloud, "that's inconvenient." That night, Harold dreamed of wires. Miles of them. Tangled, humming, alive. He tried to trace them back to their source, but every time he reached for one, it shifted, slipped away, rewired itself. He woke before dawn, heart racing, hands tingling. His body remembered things his mind couldn't organize anymore. That frightened him. In the morning, Harold dropped a plate. It shattered at his feet, ceramic exploding across the kitchen tile. He stared down at the mess, breathing hard. Years ago, he would have cursed, cleaned it up, and forgotten about it. Now, he just stood there, surrounded by fragments, unsure why his hands were shaking. He knelt to pick up the pieces. The room tilted violently. This time, there was no warning, no polite suggestion. Harold collapsed sideways, landing hard against the cabinet. Pain shot through his hip, sharp and immediate. He lay there, stunned, the cold towel pressed against his cheek. The house was silent. For the first time, Harold didn't speak. He listened. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. His breath came in shallow bursts. His body, finally unfiltered, delivered its message, without kindness. "You are not in control anymore." Tears stung his eyes, not from pain, but from something older and heavier. After a minute that felt like an hour, Harold rolled onto his back and laughed weakly. "Well," he whispered to the ceiling, "you could have said something sooner." But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. His body had been speaking for a long time. He just hadn't been listening. Harold didn't remember standing up from the kitchen floor. What he remembered was the ceiling, the faint water stains shaped like Florida, the crack that ran diagonally like a fault line, and the slow realization that he was breathing too fast for a man who wasn't running from anything. His hip throbbed. Not unbearable, just enough to announce itself with authority. "Well," he said to the ceiling, voice thin, "this is embarrassing." He waited for the world to tilt again. It didn't. That bothered him more than if it had. Harold stayed there longer than necessary, partly to let his heart slow, partly because getting up now felt like admitting something he wasn't ready to name. When he finally pushed himself upright, he did it carefully, as if negotiating with an unfamiliar animal. He cleaned up the broken plate with a dustpan, every movement deliberate. No rushing. No bending too fast. No heroics. By noon, the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a heavy, unsettled quiet. That quiet followed him all afternoon. By evening, Harold had convinced himself it was a fluke. A slip. A bad angle. Ceramic betrayal. That's how aging worked, right? Things happened. Bodies changed. Gravity got ambitious. He reheated soup, burned his tongue slightly, and felt strangely relieved by the pain. Pain meant feedback. Feedback meant things were still connected. He sat at the kitchen table and ate slowly, chewing longer than usual. His jaw felt tired halfway through. That was new. He ignored it. Later, while washing the bowl, he forgot what he'd already rinsed and what he hadn't. He stood there, water running, staring at the same spot until his fingers went numb. "Don't be stupid," he muttered. He turned off the faucet. The house felt bigger at night. Too quiet. Every sound stood out. The tick of the clock, the pop of cooling pipes, the distant whoosh of a passing car. Harold went to bed early. Sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, Harold woke with the uneasy sense that something had already gone wrong. He sat up slowly, testing himself like a mechanic listening for engine knock. His balance held. His head stayed clear.
Good.
He swung his legs over the edge of the bed and reached for his shoes. He hesitated. Yesterday's moment returned uninvited. The dizziness, the resistance, the strange negotiation between body and will. Harold tied the shoes sitting upright, foot propped on the chair again. Efficient. Controlled. He told himself it was temporary. Temporary had become a popular word lately. At 11 o'clock, his phone rang. Harold stared at it like it had committed a personal offense. The screen read, Melissa. His thumb hovered. It had been 3 weeks since their last call.
Not long by most standards.
Long by theirs. Their conversations had developed a fragile rhythm, brief, polite, careful not to step on anything sharp. He answered on the 4th ring. "Hey," Melissa said. Her voice carried the same cautious warmth he remembered from when she was a teenager, and he came home late from work. "Hey," he replied. "You okay?" she asked. The question landed heavier than it should have. "Fine," Harold said automatically. A pause. "You sound tired. Didn't sleep great." Another pause. Longer this time. "Dad, did something happen?" Harold opened his mouth to dismiss it, then closed it again. "No," he said finally. "Nothing worth worrying about." Melissa exhaled slowly. He could hear it through the phone. "I'm coming by this weekend," she said. "That's not necessary." "I know," she replied. "I'm still coming." Harold felt irritation rise, sharp, defensive. "I'm not an invalid." "I didn't say you were." "You implied it." "I implied I miss you." Silence stretched between them. "That's different," Harold said quietly. Melissa didn't argue. They said goodbye carefully, like people handling glass. When the call ended, Harold sat with the phone in his hand longer than necessary. His chest felt tight. Not pain. Pressure. He stood up and walked it off. The clinic waiting room felt smaller this time. Dr. Mitchell reviewed the new test results with his usual calm, which Harold was beginning to resent. "Your blood work's mostly stable," the doctor said. "But there are patterns." Harold hated patterns. Patterns suggested inevitability. "Patterns of what?" he asked. "Adaptation," Dr. Mitchell replied. "Your body's been compensating for reduced balance and circulation." "So I'm failing," Harold said flatly. "No," the doctor said. "You're adjusting." That sounded like a nice word for the same thing. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward. "Your body is prioritizing. Conserving. It's not breaking down randomly." Harold scoffed. "It sure feels random when I end up on the floor." "Random to you," the doctor said gently. "Not to your nervous system." Harold didn't like that either. They discussed physical therapy, monitoring, slowing down. Slowing down felt like surrender. "Am I dying?" Harold asked bluntly. Dr. Mitchell met his gaze.
No.
Relief came too quickly. It made Harold suspicious. "But," the doctor continued, "you are at a point where ignoring signs will cost you more than listening to them." Harold nodded without committing to anything. On the way out, he passed an older man sitting alone, hands folded calmly in his lap. The man looked up and smiled.
First time, the man asked.
Harold snorted. Hardly. First time paying attention then, the man said kindly. Harold frowned. You don't know that. The man chuckled. Neither did I. Until my body stopped asking nicely. Harold left before the conversation could go anywhere dangerous. That afternoon, Harold tried to nap. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind replayed small moments he'd dismissed. The way he'd started holding railings, the way he avoided ladders now, the way fatigue arrived faster and stayed longer. Not failures. Adjustments. That word again. By evening, his knee ached. His back felt stiff. His head felt heavy, like it was full of fog that refused to lift. He reached for the pain reliever bottle, then stopped. Instead, he sat down. Listened. His body felt busy, like it was working overtime without telling him why. That scared him more than pain ever had. Melissa arrived Saturday morning. She noticed the way he moved immediately. Did you hurt yourself? She asked.
No.
Dad. I said no. She dropped it, but her eyes didn't. They talked over coffee. Avoided certain topics expertly. You eating okay? She asked casually. Yes. You sleeping? Enough. She nodded, unconvinced. Later, when she stood to leave, Harold felt a wave of dizziness watching her put on her coat. He gripped the chair without realizing it. Melissa saw. That, she said softly, is what I'm worried about. Harold wanted to argue. Instead, he said, I'm just recalibrating. Melissa blinked. That's a new word for you. He smiled faintly. Doctor's influence. She hugged him longer than usual. After she left, the house felt emptier than before. That night, Harold woke from a dream where he was young again, climbing a ladder, wire spools slung over his shoulder, only to feel his heart racing, body stiff, breath shallow. He sat up, hands shaking. For the first time, he didn't joke. He listened, and what he heard wasn't fear. It was warning, not of death, of resistance. His body wasn't failing. It was insisting. Insisting he stop pretending nothing had changed. Harold stared into the darkness, pulse slowly settling. All right, he whispered. He didn't know yet what he was agreeing to, but for the first time, he wasn't ignoring the question. Harold's body woke him before his mind did. Not with pain. Not with panic. With pressure. A dull, spreading tightness beneath his ribs, as if something inside him had shifted overnight and hadn't bothered to ask permission. He lay still, eyes open, listening to his own breathing the way a stranger might. Curious, slightly alarmed. Slow in. Slower out. He placed a hand on his chest. His heartbeat felt uneven, not erratic, just cautious. Like it was measuring its steps. You too, he whispered. The ceiling, unchanged, offered no guidance. Harold sat up slowly. The dizziness didn't come this time, but the absence of it didn't comfort him. It felt temporary. Conditional. He stood, shuffled to the bathroom, and caught his reflection in the mirror. He looked older than he remembered. Not dramatically. No sudden collapse of features. Just subtle shifts, shoulders slightly rounded, eyes carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. The face of a man who had lived through things without stopping to process them. His body remembered those things. His mind had filed them away. Later that morning, Harold found the box. It sat on the top shelf of the hall closet, wedged behind winter coats he hadn't worn in years. He hadn't gone looking for it. He was reaching for a flashlight when his fingers brushed cardboard. The box was lighter than he expected. Inside were envelopes. Letters. His handwriting stared back at him, steadier, younger, confident. Addresses written, but never stamped. Names he hadn't said out loud in years. Melissa. David. His late wife, Ellen. Harold sat on the floor, back against the wall, box in his lap. His chest tightened again. He opened the first letter. He didn't remember writing them.
But his body did.
Each sentence carried a familiar tension, the way his shoulders tensed as he read, the way his breathing changed at certain lines. Apologies he'd meant to deliver in person. Explanations he'd rehearsed, but never spoken. I didn't know how to stop working. I thought providing was the same as being present. I didn't mean to miss so much. Harold closed the letter and leaned his head back against the wall. A sharp pain flared in his shoulder. Old, familiar. He'd injured it decades ago, lifting a transformer alone because he didn't want to ask for help. He laughed softly. Figures. The pain wasn't random. It never had been. That afternoon, Harold's phone buzzed. Melissa again. He almost ignored it. Instead, he answered. I found something, he said before she could speak. She hesitated. Something good or something dangerous? Depends how honest you're feeling. Silence. I can come over, she said. Yeah, Harold replied. I think you should. Melissa arrived with that same careful energy, not wanting to intrude, not wanting to leave. Harold handed her one of the letters. She read quietly, eyes scanning faster as she went. When she finished, she didn't look up right away. I didn't know you felt like this, she said finally. I didn't either, Harold admitted. His chest ached, not physically this time, but close enough that his body reacted anyway. His breath shortened. His hands trembled slightly. Melissa noticed. You okay? Yeah, he said. Then, after a beat, no. She set the letter down. They talked. Not carefully. Not efficiently. They talked like people who had run out of time to be polite. Harold admitted things he hadn't planned to say. Melissa said things she'd held back for years. The room felt heavier with every truth, but somehow easier to breathe in. At one point, Harold's vision blurred. Not emotionally. Physically. The edges of the room softened. Sounds dulled. Dad. Melissa said sharply, standing. Sit back. I am sitting. Lie down. I'm fine. You're not. This time, he didn't argue. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and inevitability. Harold lay in the bed, monitors quietly doing their job. Melissa sat beside him, arms crossed, jaw tight. Dr. Mitchell stood at the foot of the bed, calm as ever. You had an episode, the doctor explained. Not a heart attack. Not a stroke. Harold waited. But, Dr. Mitchell continued, your body reacted strongly to emotional stress. Melissa frowned. Stress from talking? From carrying things too long, the doctor corrected. Harold stared at the ceiling again. So, he said slowly, you're telling me my body nearly shut me down because I finally told the truth. Dr. Mitchell nodded. In simple terms? Yes. Harold laughed, a dry, disbelieving sound. Well, he muttered, that's one way to get my attention. Dr. Mitchell leaned closer. Your body has been adapting for years, Harold. Not just physically. Neurologically. Emotionally. Emotionally? Harold scoffed. You compartmentalized, the doctor said. Your body didn't. That sentence landed hard. Melissa reached for his hand. For once, Harold didn't pull away. That night, alone in the hospital room, Harold listened to the machines and let his thoughts wander where they hadn't been allowed before. He thought about Ellen. About the nights he'd come home too tired to talk. The weekends he'd spent fixing things instead of sitting still. The arguments he'd avoided because avoidance felt productive. His body reacted, chest tightening, throat closing. He breathed through it. Didn't push it away. The sensation passed. Slowly. Like something releasing its grip. In the early hours of the morning, Harold woke again. Not in distress, but clarity. His body felt exhausted. But calm. For the first time in weeks, the pressure was gone. Dr. Mitchell returned later with a quiet verdict. Your body isn't giving up, he said. It's asking you to live differently. Harold nodded. Not because he understood fully, but because his body agreed. When he returned home, the house felt different. Not emptier. Honest. Harold placed the letters back in the box, not as burdens, but as reminders. That night, he sat at the table without distraction. No television. No radio. Just listening. His body no longer shouted. It waited. And for the first time, Harold was ready to answer. Harold woke to sunlight. Not the harsh kind that demanded attention, but the gentle spill that slipped through the blinds and rested on the far wall like it had nowhere else to be. For a moment, he didn't move. He lay there listening, not for alarms, not for symptoms, not for warnings, just listening. His body felt different. Not stronger. Not younger. Quieter. The constant low-level tension he'd lived with for years, the bracing, the guarding, the readiness to push through, had loosened. He breathed in deeply, slowly, and waited for the familiar resistance. It didn't come. "Well," he whispered, almost amused, "would you look at that?" He sat up carefully. No spin. No protest. Just the soft stiffness of age doing what age did best, reminding him to be patient. Harold smiled. Patience, it turned out, was not the enemy. The house no longer felt like something he had to defend. That surprised him. For years, Harold had treated independence like a border, something to guard fiercely, even if it meant standing alone. Now, as he shuffled into the kitchen and put the kettle on, he realized how exhausting that posture had been. The kettle whistled. He didn't rush it. He poured his coffee, sat down, and actually tasted it. Still bitter. Still weak. Still his. Melissa came by that afternoon. This time, Harold noticed the way she relaxed when she stepped inside. No scanning the room for hazards. No measuring his posture or listening for strain in his voice. "You look lighter," she said. He considered that. "I stopped carrying things that weren't mine anymore." She smiled. "That sounds like something a therapist would say." "Don't get excited," Harold replied. "I'm still allergic to group sharing." They laughed. Later, they walked slowly around the block. Harold used a cane now, not because he couldn't walk without it, but because it gave him something unexpected. Freedom. People didn't rush him. Didn't expect speed. Didn't confuse pace with worth. At the corner, a teenage boy struggled with a stalled car, hood up, frustration written all over him. Harold stopped. "Want some help?" he asked. The boy hesitated. Yeah, if you know engines." Harold smiled faintly. "I know systems." They talked through it together. Harold didn't touch much. He pointed, explained, asked questions. The engine sputtered, then caught. The boy grinned like he'd just won something. "Thanks, sir." "Any time," Harold said. As they walked away, Melissa glanced at him. "You didn't even get tired." Harold nodded. "Because I wasn't proving anything." Weeks passed. Harold attended physical therapy, not resentfully, but curiously. He learned how his body compensated, how it shifted load, how it protected him without complaint. He adjusted his routines. Slower mornings, shorter tasks, longer conversations. He called David. That call didn't fix everything, but it fixed enough. One evening, Harold sat at the kitchen table with the old letterbox open in front of him. He reread them, not with regret this time, but recognition. His body had carried those words for decades. Now they were lighter. One afternoon, Dr. Mitchell reviewed his progress and smiled. "You're stabilizing," the doctor said. Harold raised an eyebrow. "That sounds suspiciously permanent." "It's not," Dr. Mitchell replied. "But neither is decline." Harold nodded slowly. That night, alone in the quiet house, he finally understood what his body had been telling him all along. It wasn't asking if he was ready to die. It was asking if he was ready to stop living as if usefulness only came from strain. On a crisp autumn morning, Harold sat on a bench at the park, watching leaves fall with no urgency at all. Children ran past. A couple argued softly nearby. A dog barked at something invisible. Life continued. Harold rested his hands on the cane and felt the solid steadiness of it. At 74, his body had already answered the question most people avoided. Not how long do I have left, but what am I willing to release, so I can live what's left honestly. He breathed in. He breathed out. And for the first time in years, there was no argument between body and mind. Only agreement.